पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ बहुत सारे महाज खुले, कुछ हमने खुद खोले और काफी सारे हमारे खिलाफ खोले गए। आज का महाज बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम, अस्सलाम वालेकुम। मैं हूं वजाहत सईद खान। आज का महाज अक़लियतों के नाम। थोड़ी देर कबल ये जो मनाज़र हैं ये हमारे सामने से गुजरे, क्योंकि पोप फ्रांसिस जो हैं, जो कैथलिक्स के जो सबसे आप कह सकते हैं बड़ा सेक्ट है क्रिश्चियनिटी का, और क्रिश्चियनिटी दुनिया का सबसे प्रैक्टिस्ड मजहब है, पोप फ्रांसिस गुजर चुके हैं। अब ये जो पूरा मरहला है, ये नया पोप कौन होगा, पोप फ्रांसिस की क्या अहमियत है, ये तो एक पूरा शो मांगता है। मगर आज हम दस्ती आपको बताते हैं कि इस सब की अहमियत क्विकली क्या है। पोप फ्रांसिस पहले लैटिन अमेरिकन पोप थे, ठीक ठाक रिफॉर्मर थे, चर्च की सॉफ्ट इमेज उन्होंने प्रमोट की, और स्पेशली गजा में जो इजरायली जारियत है उसके खिलाफ उन्होंने काफी बोला। काफी दिनों से वो बीमार थे, मगर जब तक वो सही थे, तबीयत उनकी अच्छी थी, पिछले साल डेढ़ साल से उन्होंने कंसेक्यूटिवली दीगर स्टेटमेंट्स फलस्तीनियों के, मुसलमानों के, गजा के बाशिंदों के हक में दी। इनफैक्ट गजा को एक ओपन एयर प्रिजन कहा और वेस्टर्न गवर्नमेंट्स को फोर्स किया कि वो सीज फायर की एग्रीमेंट करें। वैसे तो ज्यादातर जो मगरबी ममालिक हैं उनमें चर्च स्टेट डिवाइड होती है, मतलब कि वो थियोक्रेसीज नहीं है, पाकिस्तान की तरह नहीं है, उनके जो आइन होते हैं वो सेकुलर होते हैं, मगर फिर भी वेस्टर्न पॉलिटिक्स में पोप की, चर्च की बहुत इज्जत है। मेरी सड़क पे जिधर मैं रहता हूँ न्यूयॉर्क में 2 चर्चेस हैं, और उधर पॉलिटिशियंस छोटे बड़े आके कैंपेन करते हैं। तो चर्चेस का मगरबी दुनिया में फिर भी आज भी सियासी तौर पे एक इम्पोर्टेंट उनका कनेक्शन है, और पोप फ्रांसिस काफी पॉलिटिकल थे, और उन्होंने दीगर ऐसी बातें कही जिनसे उनकी बहुत रिस्पेक्ट हुई। कुछ दिन पहले ही, 3-4 दिन पहले ही, जेडी वैंस जो इधर के वाइस प्रेसिडेंट हैं अमेरिका के, बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट आदमी हैं, डोनाल्ड ट्रंप के राइट हैंड मैन हैं, उन्होंने एक्चुअली जो है कबूल किया, कैथोलिसिज्म को कन्वर्ट किया, और उन्होंने जाके पोप की बैत ली। तो इस वक्त पोप की जो अहमियत है वो अमेरिकी सियासत में इसलिए इम्पोर्टेंट है क्योंकि इधर का जो नंबर 2 आदमी है वो कैथलिक बन गया है। मगर इधर की सियासत को छोड़ें और थोड़ी अपनी तरफ आए। पाकिस्तान में जिनके लीडर्स ने, हमारे फॉरेन ऑफिस ने, प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने, इवन वो उधर लंदन में अल्ताफ हुसैन साहब ने, सब ने कंडोलेंसेज अपनी शाया की हैं। सब ने कहा है कि ओ व्हाट अ ग्रेट लॉस। मगर पाकिस्तान की अक़लियत की जो स्टेज है, अक़लियतों की जो स्टेज है, वो किधर है? एक शख्स था, शायद हम भूल गए हैं, मगर हम आपको याद दिलाते हैं। उसका नाम था कायद आज़म मोहम्मद अली जिन्ना। और कायद आज़म मोहम्मद अली जिन्ना ने पाकिस्तान के बनने से 2-3 दिन पहले कंस्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली ऑफ पाकिस्तान में एक जबरदस्त स्पीच की थी। ये स्पीच आपने सुनी होगी, नहीं सुनी तो एक बार फिर मैं इसका एक इंपॉर्टेंट एस्पेक्ट पढ़ देता हूँ। You are free to go to your temples. You are free to go to your mosques or to any other places of worship. In the state of Pakistan, you may belong to any religion, caste or creed that has nothing to do with the business of the state. तर्जुमा, कायदे आज़म ने फरमाया कि तुम आज़ाद हो, तुम अपनी मंदिरों में जाने के लिए आज़ाद हो, तुम अपनी मस्जिदों में जाने के लिए आज़ाद हो, या कहीं और जाने के लिए आज़ाद हो अपनी इबादत करने के लिए। तुम किसी भी रिलीजन, किसी भी मजहब या कास्ट मतलब जात, या क्रीड मतलब बयानिए से तुम वाबस्ता हो, वो जो भी हो, वो तुम्हारा मसला है। स्टेट का, रियासत का इसमें कोई हाथ नहीं। ये कायदे आज़म ने फरमाया। मगर आज पाकिस्तान की अक़लियतों की क्या सिचुएशन है हम सबको पता है। पहले तो हम जायजा लेते हैं कि हैं कितनी अक़लियतें। हिंदूज पाकिस्तान में 1.4 मिलियन हिंदू हैं। क्रिश्चियंस पाकिस्तान में 1.2 मिलियन है, अहमदी पाकिस्तान में तकरीबन 1.25 लाख हैं, सिख पाकिस्तान में तकरीबन 6,000 हैं, और इसके अलावा तकरीबन लाख हमारे पारसी, बहाई, बुद्धिस्ट, कलाशी भाई बहनें हैं। मगर इन सब में जो खबरों में आती हैं चीज़ें, वो क्या आती हैं? ब्लास्फेमी लॉज अभी तक वेपनाइज होते हैं, यूज होते हैं, स्पेशली हमारे क्रिश्चियन भाइयों के खिलाफ, स्पेशली पंजाब में। फोर्स्ड कन्वर्जन्स जो हैं वो ऑन द राइज हैं। ह्यूमन राइट्स ग्रुप्स ने रिपोर्ट किया है कि 1,000 से ज़्यादा क्रिश्चियन और हिंदू लड़कियां जो हैं उनकी फोर्स्ड कन्वर्जन हुई है, उनको किडनैप किया जाता है, फोर्सफुली कन्वर्ट किया जाता है, कभी कभी रेप भी किया जाता है। सिर्फ 2023 में, ये जो 2 साल पहले जो गुजरे हैं, 1,000 से ज्यादा क्रिश्चियन और हिंदू लड़कियों को पाकिस्तान में फोर्सफुली कन्वर्ट किया गया। अहमदियों की बात तो हम अगर करें तो शायद हमारे खिलाफ कुछ रिपोर्ट लग जाए, बन जाए, TLP पता नहीं केस खोल देगा। मगर अहमदियों का जो सीन है वो आपको पता है, 1974 में भुट्टो साहब ने, द एनलाइटेंड मिस्टर भुट्टो, जिनकी बड़ी लोग इज्जत करते हैं, बल्कि कहते हैं कि अभी तक वो जिंदा हैं, द एनलाइटेंड मिस्टर भुट्टो मेड श्योर दैट पाकिस्तान का जो 1973 का आइन था उसमें उनकी जो मस्जिदें हैं उनको डिक्लेयर कर दिया जाए कि वो मस्जिदें नहीं हैं, वो कुछ और हैं, उनका कोई और नाम है, उन्हें हम बोल ही नहीं सकते। और उस हिसाब से उन्हें इवन पब्लिकली वो अस्सलाम वालेकुम नहीं कह सकते। अकॉर्डिंग टू द रूल्स, आपको एक अहमदी, आपका भाई या बहन जो पाकिस्तानी है, जिसने पाकिस्तान की फौज में सर्व किया है, जो पाकिस्तान के दीगर इदारों में जिन्होंने सर्व किया है, इनफैक्ट पाकिस्तान का पहला नोबेल प्राइज फिजिक्स में एक अहमदी ने जीता था, मगर वो आपको अस्सलाम वालेकुम नहीं कह सकता। जस्ट इमेजिन, ये अकॉर्डिंग टू द रूल्स हैं। क्रिश्चियंस चले अहले किताब हैं। क्रिश्चियंस के बारे में हमने क्या किया है क्रिश्चियंस को? लास्ट आपको याद होगा रिजन वाला जो है पंजाब में, इसमें 21 चर्चेज एक दिन में, 21 एक नहीं, दो नहीं, 21 चर्चेज एक दिन में जला दी थी। और ज्यादातर हमने नाम रखे हुए हैं इनके, चूड़ा, भंगी, इस किस्म के हमारे स्लैंग्स हैं इनके लिए। उनका इस वक्त क्या रोल है? हालांकि वो भी फौज में है, वो भी पाकिस्तान की दीगर सर्विसेज में है, उनका क्या रोल है? हाउ डू वी ट्रीट देम? एंड लेट्स नॉट इवन गेट इनटू what has happened in the smaller provinces. सिंध में, KPK में रॉकेट अटैक्स हुए हैं हिंदुओं के टेम्पल्स पे और सिखों के टेम्पल्स पे, डेसिक्रेट हुआ है। तो ये तो पिछले सालों से खबरें चलती हैं, आती हैं, चली जाती हैं। 2-3 दिन पहले अहमदियों की इबादतगाह पे अटैक हुआ, लिंच किया एक बंदे को, मार दिया गया उसे। एक दिन के लिए डॉन में खबर चली, ज्यादातर अखबारों ने कवर नहीं किया, खबर आगे निकल गई, हम उधर ही खड़े हैं। फ्रीडम हाउस कहता है 2024 में पाकिस्तान का स्कोर 35 आउट ऑफ 100 है। 35 आउट ऑफ 100 मतलब 100 में से 35 नंबर हमें फ्रीडम हाउस देता है, बड़ा थिंक टैंक है, कि हम पार्टली फ्री हैं रिलीजियस और माइनॉरिटी राइट्स पे। वर्ल्ड जस्टिस प्रोजेक्ट कहता है कि पाकिस्तान 2024 में पाकिस्तान 142 ममालिक में से 129 पाकिस्तान की रेटिंग है, मतलब टॉप, बॉटम ऑफ द बॉटम। ग्लोबल ह्यूमन राइट्स एंड रूल ऑफ लॉ इंडेक्स कहता है कि पाकिस्तान में 10 में से सिर्फ 7.8 जो हैं हमारे स्कोर बनता है फॉर ह्यूमन राइट्स। और इवन अमेरिका, हमारा चाचू, कहता है यूएस कमीशन ऑन इंटरनेशनल रिलीजियस फ्रीडम हमें कहता है कंट्री ऑफ पर्टिकुलर कंसर्न, जिधर सिस्टमैटिक ऑनगोइंग एग्रीजियस वायलेशंस हैं रिलीजियस फ्रीडम की। तो हमारे वजीर आजम, हमारे दीगर और रहनुमा जो हैं इस वक्त ढंडोरा पीट रहे हैं कि हाय बड़ा अफसोस हुआ जी, पोप पास कर गए, मगर what does this really mean in real terms? और सिर्फ रिलीजियस माइनॉरिटीज की बात नहीं करते, एथनिक माइनॉरिटीज पे आए तो आपको पता है पाकिस्तान में ज्यादातर पॉपुलेशन पंजाबी है, 44%, मगर पठान पता है आपको कितने हैं? 15% पठान है, 14% सिंधी हैं, 10% सराइकी स्पीकर्स हैं, 7.6% मुहाजिर हैं या उर्दू स्पीकर्स हैं, 3.6% बलोच हैं। अब वो पंजाबियों को हटा के बाकी माइनॉरिटीज का अगर आप जायजा लें, पठानों का, सिंधियों का, सराइकियों का, मुहाजिरों का, बलोचों का और अदर्स, तो उसमें भी वही इश्यूज हैं। बलोचों के मिसिंग पर्संस हैं, उनके रहनुमा जो हैं उठाए गए हैं। पठानों की आपने PTM को बंद किया हुआ है। सिंधी आजकल मार्च कर रहे हैं अपने पानी के लिए जो आप उनसे लेना चाह रहे हैं, एंड आई कैन गो ऑन एंड ऑन। एथनिक माइनॉरिटीज के अलग इश्यूज हैं, रिलीजियस माइनॉरिटीज के अलग इश्यूज हैं, और अपने होम टाउन कोयटा के हजारों का जो हमारे शिया भाई हैं उनको तो मैं मेंशन ही ना करूं, बेहतर है इससे पहले कि मुझ पे कोई केस लग जाए, मगर उनको स्पेसिफिकली टारगेट किया गया है, हमारे भाइयों को, स्पेशली बलूचिस्तान में, कोयटे में। अब इस सब में व्हाट डज दिस मीन फॉर यू? इतना लंबा चौड़ा आज भाषण क्यों मैं दे रहा हूं? बिकॉज जो सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट रिलीजियस फिगर है मगरबी दुनिया का, वो फौत हो गया है। हर सीनियर पॉलिटिशियन दुनिया का, हर सीनियर लीडर उसके बारे में बात कर रहा है, हमारे लीडर्स ने भी बात की है, मगर हम अपने बारे में बात अपने मुल्क में बैठ के नहीं कर सकते। ये रिसेंटली इंडियन थिंक टैंक है ORF, ये बैठ के बलोचिस्तान पे बात कर सकते हैं, जो आप इस वीडियो में देख रहे हैं कर रहे हैं। तो इंडिया में बलोचिस्तान डिस्कस हो रहा है, इंडिया में PTM डिस्कस हो रहा है, इंडिया में TTP डिस्कस हो रहा है, मगर हम अपने थिंक टैंक्स, अपने कैंपसेस, अपनी यूनिवर्सिटीज में बातें नहीं कर सकते। मीनवाइल हमारे जो मुआहदे हैं वो चल रहे हैं। अभी ये डिप्टी जो है प्राइम मिनिस्टर आए यूनाइटेड अरब एमिरेट्स के, इनके लिए पूरा इस्लामाबाद एज यूजुअल बंद कर दिया गया। जो भी लगाते हैं कंटेनर लगाए। अब आप दोस्ती करना चाह रहे हैं सऊदियों के साथ और अमीरातियों के साथ स्पेसिफिकली, क्योंकि वो इंडिया से क्लोज हो रहे हैं, इजराइल से क्लोज हो रहे हैं, आप भी इसमें घुसना चाह रहे हैं। अब आप क्या इनके साथ कैचअप कर सकेंगे? क्योंकि सऊदी ये वो वाला सऊदी नहीं है जो 80s में आपको जिहाद के लिए पैसे देता था। ये वो वाला UAE नहीं है जो 90s में आपके टैक्सी ड्राइवरों को सिर्फ बुलाता था लेबर क्लास के लिए। ये वो अब UAE और सऊदी हैं जो रिलीजियसली आपसे ज्यादा टॉलरेंट हो गए हैं, आपसे ज्यादा मॉडर्न हो गए हैं, ये आगे निकल गए हैं। आप उधर ही खड़े हैं, आप उधर ही 60s 70s 80s वाली हेट्रेड में खड़े हैं, मगर ये ममालिक आगे निकल गए हैं। सऊदिया में अहमदियों को कोई बॉदर नहीं करता, सऊदिया में हिंदू हैं उनको कोई बॉदर नहीं करता, UAE में हर एक के पास रिलीजियस फ्रीडम है। हाँ, कंसर्न्स हैं, वो पुलिस स्टेट्स हैं, मगर वो आगे निकल गई हैं। आप उधर ही खड़े हैं जो आपकी हेटफुल किस्म की, पोलराइजिंग किस्म की आपकी जो रिलीजियोसिटी है। अब इस सब में आपके पास क्या चॉइस है? मेन चॉइस तो ये है कि आप बहस करें। पाकिस्तान में कोई बहस नहीं कर सकता। क्या आप बात कर सकते हैं पाकिस्तान में आज अहमदियों के बारे में? नो। क्या आप बात कर सकते हैं पाकिस्तान में आज शियों के बारे में? नो सर। क्या आप बात कर सकते हैं पाकिस्तान में अहमदियों, शियों, हिंदुओं, सिखों, किसी के बारे में? वो छोड़ें। कैन यू टॉक अबाउट बलोच राइट्स? नो। मगर इंडिया में या कहीं और ये होता है। तो यू रियली हैव टू रिफ्लेक्ट कि आप किस चीज पे बात कर सकते हैं। इसी खोज में हमने आईवी फ्यूचर ऑफ पाकिस्तान कॉन्फ्रेंस शुरू की है। पिछले हफ्ते ये लॉन्च हुई, इसमें दीगर पैनल से 2-3 मैंने आपको दिखाए हैं। आज एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट पैनल आपको अर्ज करूंगा कि आप देखें। ये पैनल जो है ये येल यूनिवर्सिटी के प्रोफेसर AR मलिक ने मॉडरेट किया। इसमें मशहूर ज़माना बलोच जर्नलिस्ट मलिक सिराज अकबर हैं, जो इधर काफ़ी अरसे से जिला वतन हैं, वाशिंगटन में रहते हैं। उनके अलावा रिदा अली, जो बड़ी ज़बरदस्त किस्म की शिया इन्फ्लुएंसर हैं, पाकिस्तानी अमेरिकन हैं, मगर शिया इश्यूज़ पे बात करती हैं, बहुत इन्फ्लुएंशियल इन्फ्लुएंसर हैं। और फिर माइकल कुगलमैन, जो बड़े सुलझे हुए और ठहराव वाले एनालिस्ट हैं। अब अजीब सी बात है कि हम येल यूनिवर्सिटी में इकट्ठे होके, जो दुनिया की मशहूर तरीन यूनिवर्सिटीज़ में उसकी फहरिस्त में आती है, उसमें हम बैठ के इधर बलोचों के बारे में, पठानों के बारे में, सिंधियों के बारे में, अहमदियों के बारे में, शियों के बारे में बात कर सकते हैं। हमें कोई कुछ नहीं कहता, मगर उधर नहीं कर सकते। और जिधर जब हमने बात ही करना शुरू की बाय द वे, तो स्पेसिफिकली इस कॉन्फ्रेंस में इस पैनल के लिए बड़ा लोगों को तकलीफ थी। ये कौन लोग थे मैं कभी और बताऊंगा, बट बड़े लोग वरिड थे कि यार नाक ना कटवा देना। नाक कटवाने की बात नहीं है, मेरे कंट्रोल में नहीं है, ना होना चाहिए कि लोग क्या कहते हैं। मेरा सिर्फ एक काम था बहैसियत एक फैसिलिटेटर कि एक अच्छी इन्वायरमेंट में, एक एकेडमिक इन्वायरमेंट में जो बेस्ट प्रैक्टिशनर्स हैं उस सब्जेक्ट एरिया के, वो बात करें। और उन्होंने बात की सिर्फ पाकिस्तान की अक़लियतों के बारे में नहीं, मगर बड़े सगीर के अक़लियतों के बारे में। इंडिया को भी टच किया, अफगानिस्तान को भी टच किया। इसे कहते हैं बहस, इसे कहते हैं मुबाहिसा। ये है बेसिस पाकिस्तान की बुनियाद का। फिर से याद दिलाता चलूं, पाकिस्तान का जो झंडा है उसमें जो चिट्टा रंग है, अब मैं उनसे बात कर रहा हूँ जिनको चिट्टा का मतलब पता है, जिन्हें पंजाबी नहीं आती। चिट्टे का मतलब है व्हाइट। पाकिस्तान में जो व्हाइट रंग है पाकिस्तान के परचम में, वो माइनॉरिटीज के लिए, मगर जिस तरीके से वो ऑलरेडी कम था, ऑलरेडी इतना बड़ा सब्ज था और बाकी जो है वो व्हाइट था, मगर वो आहिस्ता 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 अनफॉर्चुनेटली कम होता जा रहा है। झंडे पे व्हाइट लगाने से ऑन द ग्राउंड जमीनी हकायक तो नहीं बदलते, मगर जमीनी हकायक अब बदलने का वक्त आ गया है। रिफ्लेक्ट करें, अगले चंद मिनट जो हैं इस डिबेट को एंजॉय करें। ऐसी डिबेट है जो लास्ट टाइम कोई बलोच, कोई शिया, कोई इंटरनेशनल ऑब्जर्वर नहीं साथ बैठे पाकिस्तान के बारे में डिबेट करते हुए, क्योंकि डिबेट्स अलाउड नहीं है। वी वांट टू चेंज दैट एंड वी वांट टू चेंज दैट थ्रू इंडिपेंडेंट मीडिया। इसलिए शेयर करें, लाइक करें, सब्सक्राइब करें, कमेंट करें। आज़ाद मीडिया को सिर्फ आज़ाद इंसान फॉलो कर सकता है। क्या आप आज़ाद हैं? अगर हैं तो हमारी शेयर, लाइक, सब्सक्राइब, कमेंट के अलावा हमारी जो मेंबरशिप ऑप्शंस हैं जिसका लिंक लगा हुआ है उसको चेकआउट करें। आई मिस यू, आई रियली रिस्पेक्ट यू एंड आई वुड लव to listen to your points of view. یہ جو لوگ بات کر رہے ہیں, بحث کر رہے ہیں, اس میں اگر آپ اگری نہیں کرتے اپنے اپنا حصہ ڈالیں, مگر یہ اپریشیٹ کریں کہ پاکستان جو ہے بر صغیر کے صرف مسلمانوں کے لیے نہیں بنا تھا, بر صغیر کی تمام مائنورٹیز کے لیے بنا تھا. دعوت دی تھی ہم نے سب کو. پاکستان کا مطلب کیا؟ لا الہ الا اللہ, بے شک, مگر پاکستان نے سب مائنورٹیز کو دعوت دی تھی کہ سب ادھر آ کے رہیں. کیا ادھر سب رہ سکتے ہیں آج؟ یہ سوال پوچھنا چاہیے آپ کو. اپنا خیال رکھیں اور اب انجوائے کریں ییل یونیورسٹی کی پاکستانی مائنورٹیز ایتھنک اینڈ ریلیجس پہ ڈبیٹ. ٹاک ٹو یو سون. پاکستان زندہ باد.
Thank you very much, everyone. Once again, assalamu alaikum and welcome to this panel. Just to kind of frame the conversation for us, and I guess to place myself in the conversation as we bring in each one of our guests. You know, I'm a quintessential diaspora Pakistani. You know, my father came to Canada in 1970. I was born in 1975. Went to Pakistan often. Both sides of my family are 1947 migrants. My father was born in Amritsar. My mother's family is from Jalandhar. And I grew up, you know, with this kind of adoration of Pakistan, but also critique of Pakistan in our own home. But it always came from a place of deep love. And there was never a point that I didn't feel love for this thing called Pakistan. But then, of course, as we grow up and we learn the complexities of the nation that came into being in 1947, we all sort of begin to approach and ask questions. And in some ways, marrying into Bangladeshi family, for me, was a moment of reckoning with my own history as a Punjabi, particularly, and as a Pakistani. And I think, having worked in Pakistan on issues of religious extremism over a period of maybe a decade, gave me a particular appreciation for not only some of the issues, which I can't claim to speak to with authority, but I can speak with an impression in my own lived experience, but also gave me a sense of the complex political, social, cultural, and religious layers. So I want to frame our conversation today by saying that as we explore this absolutely important, essential issue of the state of minorities, religious, cultural, linguistic, in Pakistan, that most of us on this panel are doing it from a place of love, of diasporic concern, of care and commitment for a Pakistan that lives up to its founding principles, the principles that we often turn to in the language of Muhammad Ali Jinnah as a nation founded on Islamic principles, but deeply open, accepting, embracing of all kinds of diversity. And I also want to say that we're not here as just critics, but as people who in the diaspora dream of a Pakistan where everyone, regardless of religion, ethnicity, language, sect, can realize their truest potential of themselves. And that I think we're all in this room today because we recognize that there are serious systemic, institutional, structural, cultural, and yes, religious challenges to the way in which Pakistan becomes an inclusive society. And so today, what our aspiration is on this panel is to draw on everyone's particular expertise and everyone's particular lived experience. And the beautiful thing is that in this room, we have now nearly 75 or 80 people who come with their own lived experience. And we're hoping that during our discussion, after some initial remarks from our speakers, that we'll be able to have a real conversation. I hate question and answer sessions. I just want to say that. Question and answer sessions suck because they always assume that everyone on stage knows and you do not know. I really like conversations. So when we open up the floor, we're going to be opening up to questions, comments, and concerns. And my hope is that your comments and concerns and questions will be sharp, short, and pithy, so we can have many of them, and we can also have an opportunity for our panelists to respond. I want to begin with our first panelist. I want to begin with Michael Kugelman. Many of you know Michael's work. I certainly did before we came acquainted as we were preparing for today's panel. Michael has been a longtime observer of Pakistan, a well-known journalist, someone who's commented, written about, advised policy leaders on issues around Pakistan. But he's also been someone who's been deeply engaged with the conversations in Pakistan as someone who's not from Pakistan, yet cares very deeply about not only Pakistan's success as a nation, but Pakistan's flourishing as a nation. And so in some ways, Michael, I want to bring you into the conversation first. As an observer of Pakistan, as someone who's followed the issue around the rights of minority peoples, faiths, languages, nations, within a very multilingual, multi-religious, multinational nation, which is Pakistan. And maybe you can give us, no pun intended, an eagle's eye view of kind of what's your lay of the land? What's the state right now? What are some of the major issues that you are seeing as a longtime observer of Pakistan? And maybe to give us a little bit of, to kind of situate us in the region. Maybe give us a sense of how that is contrasting with what's happening in places like Bangladesh, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and of course, our friend India.
Yeah, so thank you very much, AR. Can everyone hear me? Great, excellent. So it's really an honor to be here. It's great to connect with old friends and to meet new ones. Indeed, I'm not a member of the Pakistani diaspora, though I've oftentimes been described as an honorary Pakistani, which I appreciate, so I'm one of you today. Indeed, I have spent nearly 20 years studying, observing, engaging in and with Pakistan, so it's really an honor to be with you all here today. So, just to step back for a second, I think it's important to acknowledge a simple fact that, in a very literal sense, Pakistan, it has rich ethnic and religious diversity in the sense that it is a Sunni Muslim majority country, but it has a substantive Shia minority. There's Christian, Hindus, Ahmadis, other religions represented. You have multiple ethnicities. You have Pakistan's 4 provinces, which are demographically dominated by a separate ethnicity, and you have many more as well. But things are not good. I think we have to be very clear here. Things are not very good. Speaking first about religious minorities, varying levels of discrimination and persecution across the board. And the extent, I think, varies on the type of community that we're talking about. I think that we could all agree, or I hope that we could all agree, that Ahmadis face some of the deepest levels of structural discrimination in Pakistan. But on the whole, it's quite an extensive, many different manifestations of this through my own observations. And that includes acts of violence against religious minorities. This is something that's been happening for so long. Also, structural forms of discrimination that effectively ban certain religious minority groups from getting certain types of jobs. On the other side, certain lower level, menial level type jobs being reserved for particular religious minority communities. And I think another important manifestation of this discrimination and persecution is the issue of blasphemy law violations. I think that we all know that Pakistan's blasphemy laws are meant to protect against affronts or insults to Islam, but too often they're exploited to target religious minorities. This is something that's been playing out for quite some time. I will say this when I think about this broader state of play today, if you're looking for a silver lining, and I think it's important to hit on silver linings and good news stories. what I would describe as sectarian-driven militancy. In other words, violent extremism that targets religious minorities. This is not happening as much as it had in previous years, particularly if you look at a terrorist group like Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, LEJ, which was, it targeted Shias, it targeted religious minorities. The group is not really doing what it used to. The Pakistani Taliban, which, we all know the Pakistani Taliban, it's one of the most violent, active terror groups today. In its previous iterations, it targeted religious minorities. It doesn't do that anymore today. But that said, you have a group like Islamic State Khorasan, which of course is the Pakistan-Afghanistan-based faction of ISK. It's a sectarian-minded group that targets Hazara Shias. So there's that. And then you have other types of groups, and this is very concerning today. TLP, Tehreek-e-Labbaik-e Pakistan. It's impossible to talk about these issues in Pakistan today without bringing attention to TLP. Its main platform has been about the issue of blasphemy, and this is a group that's able to mobilize on very large levels and has been for quite some time. A few points I'll make on the issue of ethnic minorities as I see it. One, see that ethnic differences are playing out in terms of political mobilization and organization. So many political parties in Pakistan count a distinct ethnicity as their main support base. Not their only support base, but a main one. So like the Awami Nationalist Party is Pashtuns. Sindhis for the PPP, Muhajirs for MQM, Punjabis for PMLN. Now PTI is interesting. It sought to buck this trend by being a national party, and it has been able to generate strong constituencies across ethnicities. But I would say that even PTI, its main bases of support are in KPK with Pashtuns and Punjabis in Punjab. I'd also make a quick point about power dynamics. Punjabis tend to hold the most powerful positions on national levels, including and especially within the military on senior levels. Second point I would make is that much like with religious minorities, there are significant levels of discrimination toward ethnic minorities, particularly the Baloch and the Pashtuns. I know that we'll hear more about the Baloch in a bit, but just to say here, these communities have been caught up in state counterinsurgency and counterterrorism campaigns that have resulted in repression of local communities in Baluchistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa that has often targeted innocents, and this has entailed arrests and disappearances, and I would argue that this has created a dynamic that's hardened anger toward the state, led to cycles of mistrust between the state and many members of these ethnic minorities. And I think, for me, one manifestation of this mistrust and anger that's played out a lot in recent years is the Pashtun Tahfuz movement, the PTM, which is a Pashtun rights group that has been deeply critical of the military, which has resulted in heavy crackdowns on the group. Third point, very briefly, regional dynamics are worth noting in this context. So Pashtuns are the second largest ethnic group in Pakistan, but they have a large presence in border areas near Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, Pashtuns are the majority ethnicity. No Afghan government has ever recognized the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. This has seeded fears within Pakistan's establishment of a wider Pashtunistan movement and hardened its mistrust of groups like PTM, even though PTM is focused on Pakistan, not on Afghanistan. And I'd also argue that discrimination against Afghan refugees, which is an important point to highlight in Pakistan, this is linked, I think, to discrimination against Pashtuns, though there are Afghan refugees in Pakistan that are not Pashtuns. Final point, fourth and final point, I hate to end on a downer, but I would argue that ethnic-based militancy is increasing to an extent because of the Baluchistan Liberation Army. This has become one of the most active, dangerous groups, violent actors in Pakistan. It's developed the capacity to carry out attacks at greater scale and increasingly outside of Baluchistan as well, which is concerning. Back to you.
Before I move on to Rida, give us a 1-minute snapshot of what's happening in the region. Mm-hmm. How are potentially events in Bangladesh, where there has been a kind of cataclysmic political change, in India, where we see BJP leadership somewhat challenged at the ballot box, but still ascendant. It feels ascendant, mm-hmm. And in places like Sri Lanka, which has definitely seen after the ending of the Tamil liberation struggle and movement, has seen in more recent years again a kind of a rise in ethnic tensions. And if this playing into the mood music in Pakistan?
Yeah, thanks. I'll be very brief on this. I don't think that those cases that you're referring to, those countries you're referring to, that the dynamics there are, so far as I know, not directly impacting Pakistan yet. But I would point to India. I think that Hindu nationalism and the plight of religious minorities in India, particularly the case of the Muslim minority, which is of course, a very large minority, 200 million strong. I think it feeds into the structural tensions in India-Pakistan relations in the sense that you have this constant dynamic of Indian officials as well as members of the Indian public bringing attention to the plight of Hindus in Pakistan, whereas in Pakistan, a lot of attention being brought to the plight of Muslims in India. And the relationship between India and Pakistan is actually not too bad right now. I mean, there's an LOC truce that's been in place for more than 4 years. But these types of issues, these types of dynamics ensure that there's always going to be that level of tension, even in better times.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Lots to explore there and unpack. You mentioned several times the Shia minority, the Hazara in particular, and Rida, I want to bring you into the conversation. I'm so honored, first of all, that you're on the panel. Your work as a student was exemplary in terms of campus activism and organizing, and your work now as a digital storyteller is really par excellence. And I hope those of you who haven't will take an opportunity to explore Rida's work online on TikTok and on Instagram. She's that generation of cultural curators and conveners who are making a significant difference. And I think, Rida, what's interesting about your work is that it focuses a lot on the intersection of media, culture, history, and faith in South Asia, particularly Pakistan. You've just finished a degree at the School of Oriental African Studies, where you've been taking a deep dive into this. You've gone back to Pakistan. You've been looking into archives, and you've been looking at the issue of how sectarian violence has been covered in the press. You're also a proud member of the Shia community. You've been actively involved in organizing and community activities here, and also a proud member of this Pakistani diaspora. And so I think you come with so many visions as a diasporic Pakistani to this. And so I guess where I'd like to start is, for you, the exploration of your identity as a Pakistani has been a key part of your work and of your creativity. Situate that work for us. Where is that passion coming from, and how, as someone in the diaspora, are you viewing what is happening in Pakistan right now, particularly given your more recent encounters with Pakistan itself as a journalist, as an observer, as a creative?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when I was, when I first looked at the premises of this panel and I was thinking about my role in this, I saw that there was Michael and there was Malik and then there was me. The question I kept asking was this conference is going to be mostly, it's a lot of, academics, but it's also a lot of students who are trying to answer this question of what is my relationship to Pakistan, which is something that I grapple with a lot as well, as someone who went back and visited a lot. And I'm situated in an interesting place because I studied South Asian studies, I was in academia, and at the same time, I'm positioned with all these students who very much romanticize this idea of Pakistan. But then as a Shia, you can ask any Shia Muslim in America whose parents were born in Pakistan, they are 1 degree separated from a bus bombing or a target killing. I have friends whose last names don't allow them to go back to Pakistan, especially Karachi, because of target killings. And so always growing up around those stories, but then seeing when I was at a school like NYU, coming to conferences like this, what Pakistan was talked about. On this panel, my focus is for young people to engage with this idea of activism around what really Pakistan is. It's not just Coke Studio. It's not just what we engage with. It's the fact that there is history of minorities, being taken off of buses and executed right then and there because of their last names. And I think to answer your question about social media and storytelling and kind of my work around that, when I sit on this panel, I want to make it very clear that I'm a Shia Muslim in America who will never have the experience of a Shia Muslim living in Pakistan who's being persecuted. But that's a lot of us, and it's our choice as to how we want to engage with our history and our lineage. And so I decided when I was doing this master's that I was going to focus on the role of journalism and social media and the intersection that has with Shia Muslims and Hazaras and the minority groups in Pakistan. So while I was there, I realized that the biggest avenue for these minorities to talk about the issues that they were facing wasn't the mainstream television, it wasn't the government, it was social media, which over the years, that's radio, that's newspapers, now it's Twitter and Instagram, and these activists are posting online, and simply like even the creation of the radio in Pakistan, like during my research, that brought in women, that brought in minorities who weren't sitting in those seats in government, but now they were able to listen from their homes and feel included in the conversation about their country. And so back to what you're saying about the Shia community, we're going to touch on this later, but a really big part of the Shia community is storytelling. And I think that intersects with journalism is Shia aesthetics and Shia history has a lot to do with visuals and poetry and storytelling throughout the decades. And I think that that's something that we're going to touch on when it comes to this culture of like Shia history and martyrdom and how that ties into like really what's going on. But for me personally, I think that journalism and the act of being able to pass on what's happening is integral to my faith, but also integral to my role as the diaspora when it comes to Pakistan.
Well, so much to unpack there, but I want to follow up a little bit and ask you for a moment, as you are, to be an expert. You've written and you've composed and published on platforms like The Juggernaut, BuzzFeed. You've created channels of your own, which I have to say are stupendous, Rida. And I know so many people who are Gen Xers like me who are watching your stuff and saying, wow, this is stuff that I'm learning and it's new and exciting. So I want to say, because it's just damn good stuff, mashallah. So be an expert for us. Let's take a step back. I mean, Pakistani YouTube is sort of, I don't even know how to describe it. It's either, a lower circle of hell or at least some kind of content quicksand, because it's never ending. And it's, kind of levels upon levels of depression and shrill speaking. And yet, on Instagram, on TikTok, there is so much content. And clearly content, if numbers are not lying, that's being observed. What role is that content playing in creating the mood music for both the celebration of and the erasure of and the attack on minorities like the Shia Muslim minority in Pakistan?
Yeah, I think that this is a really complicated question because, like in Pakistan specifically, like there have been in 2024 85 days of media blackouts, 330 something separate social media blackouts, and I think that like within the country, it's hard to hear the voices of those who are trying to explain what's happening, and then also there's this like other aspect to it where when we see things like cultural products of Pakistan, like Coke Studio, like music, there's a lot of Shia Muslims and Shia culture has been very integrated in Pakistan since the very beginning. I mean, like you said, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, like from the very beginning till now, it's hard to say that Shia Islam was never a part of Pakistan's fabric. It's always been. It always has been, and it's a part of music. It's a part of like Qawwali. It's a part of like spirituality, and a lot of it is commodified and put into social media and culture and music. And then it's hard to point and say, well, this is what's happening to Shia Muslims in Pakistan because they're so ingrained in the fabric. And so I think it's our role as diaspora to look beyond just those cultural aesthetics of Shiaism and like language and just understand exactly what's happening on the ground and follow activists like Jibran Nasser and people speaking on Balochistan and the Hazara genocide that's happening. So yeah, it helps and it also harms because there's so much smoke that you're trying to actually see what's happening on the ground when there is so much social media blackouts. Like even when I was doing my research, trying to find trying to talk to people are scared to speak about what's happening because a lot of these groups are somewhat aligned with those in power. So yeah, I would say that that's something that I definitely, it's a two-pronged, issue. It's good and bad, social media and media.
I'm going to pick up a thread from that and try to weave it into your contribution, Malik. I think one of the things that we saw in the last Coke Studio season, as we referenced this great icon of Pakistan culture, is the focus on Balochi folk songs. And I think for many people of Pakistani origin, certainly living outside of Pakistan, for many of us, it was like the first time hearing Balochi culture, confidently, beautifully displayed and performed. And I think there was also a moment for so many of us where it's like, wow, what's this? Because it's a language I don't quite get. And we were kind of went to our parents. I remember I called my dad, and I said, Abu, talk me through this, And I realized, wow, the blind spots that we have as people who claim a certain Pakistani identity. And yet you, Malik Siraj Akbar, have been at the very heart of that work and continue to be at the heart of that work. You've been an editor, a reporter, a communications specialist, a cybersecurity professional, a media analyst. You have worked at places and studied at places like the Harvard Kennedy School. You've been engaged with the State Department. Everyone from the New York Times to the Chicago Tribune to CNN want your analysis on what is happening in Balochistan. And then being part of this Balochi diaspora and being a journalist who's deeply engaged in trying to not only tell a Balochi story, but actually as someone who's Balochi to report on the Balochi story with honesty and integrity, that cannot be an easy thing, especially when you find yourself at the nexus of being odds with lots of people in lots of different power positions. And so in a way, I think we are all really privileged to have this opportunity to engage with you. And I think where I'd like to start is if you could, similar to Michael, give us a little bit of the lay of the land and unpack for us what is happening in Balochistan. And not only that, before when we were talking about it, we had a fascinating pre-conversation, you were so nimbly and so clearly able to pick out various sort of themes of what is happening, that to really unpack the complexity for us. So we're relying on you, Malik Siraj Akbar Sahab, to give us some perspective on this from someone who's an insider, but who's often as a journalist have to step back and be an outsider. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'll try to cover as much ground as possible. I think it's a privilege for all of us to be discussing Balochistan here, because not many people within Pakistan even have that privilege. In Pakistan, you don't get to discuss Balochistan or minority issues at campuses at times. So in Pakistan, even a lot of times, people who live elsewhere in the country, in Lahore, Karachi, and Islamabad, they're equally blindsided about Balochistan, what happens in Balochistan. I can't tell you how many Pakistanis I've met here in the US who have told me that I was the first Baloch person they ever met or they ever interacted with. And ironically, we have more freedom here in the US to talk about Balochistan. I think it has a lot to do with the country's history. Our founding fathers, Pakistan's founding fathers, were very intentionally ignoring of the fact of the issue of ethnic minorities. When the country was formed, we would just give one identity to the country, that was the Muslim identity. But intentionally, the founding fathers never talked about those ethnic identities, ethnic groups that existed there. And it was also somehow the country felt the need to continuously make Pakistan a Muslim Islamic society, and that was it. So that secret was kept in the country for a long time. For a long time, Pakistanis were not told what it meant to be a Baloch, what it meant to be a Pashtun, what it meant to be a Sindhi, whereas these people existed that lived centuries before there was a country called Pakistan. So there was a big miscommunication between the central government and the provinces and all these ethnic groups. And Pakistan, as you know, the country's history, the country has struggled with military coups, with martial laws. Each martial law lasted for 10 years. So somehow the country remained absolutely disconnected and uninformed about what was happening with these ethnic communities, what their aspirations were, how they wanted to envision the country, how they wanted to give input to the country. So there was, no offense to a lot of the majority of population in Pakistan, which is 52% of the Punjabis. So the Punjabi military and bureaucracy somehow set up the narrative, the national media narrative, the literature. It was predominantly one-sided narrative. And the military or all these folks who shaped the narrative would always describe talking about ethnic identity as blasphemy, as anti-national activities. Every time you talked about the Baloch rights, they would say, what do you mean you're a Baloch? Are you not a Pakistani? And the question would be, well, it's debatable. In the same way, so they try to like suppress all these voices of the Baloch and of the Pashtun. And every time, you talk about your rights, you would immediately be branded as a foreign-funded agent. You must have been, sent by the Indians to, talk about your rights. And somehow, in a way, this just kept on building. It somehow became blasphemous to talk in the Pakistani media about very fundamental things, about being treated as an equal citizen and being treated equally. So every time the military or the establishment, which comprises of the bureaucracy as well, they had a very nasty playbook. Every time people talk about their rights, they would immediately be called an enemy of Pakistan. And people would like get offended. They would say, well, I'm a Punjabi, and I don't hate the Baluchi people. I don't hate the Baloch people. I don't hate the Pashtuns. But in a way, people wouldn't understand to make a connection with all these provinces. And whatever happened, it also, the Pakistanis would immediately tell the population, the masses, that, well, the Indians are trying to dismember Pakistan the way they did with Bangladesh. So most Pakistanis remain ignorant about what is happening in Balochistan at the moment.
One of the things that I know that you have covered, Malik Bhai, is that you've also been keenly aware of how the political situation in Balochistan itself has changed. And that as social, economic, and political tensions have risen, there has been a change in the politics of Balochistan itself. And I know you personally, as a journalist, have been deeply concerned about what is happening to the Hazara Shia minority in Balochistan, but also, interestingly enough, in our conversation earlier, you'd been talking about the Punjabi minority in Balochistan. Can you unpack a little bit that for us? And also, I'm really interested how that, in what way does that leave you? Leave you as someone who's a proud Balochi, who's campaigning and trying to tell the truth, but in that telling the truth also is uncovering some uncomfortable things. How do you get treated as a Balochi Pakistani journalist who is trying to show the big picture in the whole story?
See, the situation is dramatically changed. We have a very radicalized Baloch youth now. And the fact that I'm speaking at an event with the Pakistani title, I was somehow told by some young people I blackened my face because I went to speak at a Pakistani conference. The reason is because when I covered Balochistan, I've been covering it for the last 2 decades, I know people whose family members have disappeared. Disappearances are a big problem. Not a single policy and practice has affected the situation in Balochistan as badly as the issue of disappearances. Enforced disappearances. I know people who disappeared in 2002, 23 years down the line. The families have no closure. I have seen young kids who have been raising the pictures of the parents, going from the Supreme Court to the press clubs to universities to everywhere, begging for justice. And a lot of young people, these were all political activists who disappeared. The military secret services, they do take responsibility for it, but not in public. They go and tell the family that your family member is in our custody. Don't talk to the media, don't make noise, we will release that person. And then the next week, the military backs out and says, well, that person is not in our custody. And they throw the dead body of that person. So hundreds of the missing persons in Balochistan have been killed. Now, when you talk about it, the Pakistani friends get offended. They're like, well, you're trying to present a very negative image of Pakistan. You're supposed to present a very positive image of Pakistan.
Not hard to do this.
So when I argue with my the friends who tell me that I am kind of a traitor within the Baloch community, is because they're like, you haven't had a brother disappeared. You haven't had your family member killed. If you were in our shoes, you wouldn't be talking about reconciliation and negotiations with the Pakistanis. So fast forward, again, I just like to mention that from 2004 up till 2025, it's been 21 years. So there is a generation, a young generation of Baloch people who can't think of a world where family members don't go missing. Everybody, the kid who was born in 2004, who is 21 years today, for them, the world or the country of Pakistan is, the default setting for them is a country where you disappear. And if you make noise, you might be killed and your dead body might be dumped. So it's a generation that has not seen peace for the last 2 decades now in Balochistan. I grew up in the 1990s. Ironically, that was the only decade which was peaceful. So the younger generation has somehow has become very, very radicalized. The younger generation, again, people who haven't seen their dad in the last 2 decades, just the dad is missing and the families have no closure. Those younger people no longer want to live with Pakistan. They're like, we are only like 6% of the country's population. And if you can't treat us with respect and as equal citizens, then let us go. Like, if you can't manage our ethnic identities, can we go? Can we be a separate country? You can debate it. It's debatable. If Pakistanis get deeply offended, they're like, well, the Indians are behind this propaganda. Indians are provoking them to say all this. I mean, but this is a person whose dad was picked up by your personnel, your military guys, and so give that person a reason. Now, the younger generation, again, is moved toward militancy, toward insurgency. Now we have Baloch women, young women, who are not only fighters, but they are willing to become suicide bombers. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. And they tell me, like, well, again, you haven't lost a father, you haven't lost a brother. Who are you to like talk on our behalf? At the same time, because there's so much radicalization in Balochistan, people, the armed groups, have somehow exploited the sentiments of the masses, of the Baloch people. So the Baloch Liberation Army, which is the most prominent armed group, has been declared as a terrorist group by the US, by the British, by the Pakistanis. But in that society, for a tribesman who lost their dad, for them that designation means nothing. They still locate the BLA as the force which can fight for them, which can be their spokesperson. So no matter how much the West condemns violence, how much the Western entities, the State Department designate these groups, but they continue to have a lot of support because when the BLA carries out these attacks, they feel like the BLA is retaliating. Now it's difficult for somebody like myself to say, okay, you guys should go to the parliament. They're like, we have been going here for 20 years. We have been going to the Supreme Court of Pakistan. Why don't we get justice? So as a result, what has happened, the BLA has also committed a lot of crimes against Punjabi minorities as well, because they are like, we can't reach the military generals and colonels, but we had the Punjabis because they don't speak up, they don't speak in our favor. So in a way, this conflict has gotten very messy, very dirty, very bloody, where there are no like rules of engagement. It's just like nasty. For somebody like myself, it's difficult. Both sides, accuse me of being on the other group's side. When I tell my Baloch friends, it doesn't help to kill the innocent Punjabi laborers, picking up the Punjabi passengers. They're like, you must be an ISI agent. You're the Pakistani agent. And vice versa. When I tell the Pakistanis, just treat the Baloch with respect, just the way you would treat anybody, regardless of their ethnicity. That's not asking for too much. It's like the bare minimum. Can you treat your people with respect? If the missing persons, if there are any charges against them, if anybody committed any crimes, produce them before your own courts. We're not asking for a Baloch jirga or anything. Pakistani courts, Pakistani judges. But unfortunately, that breakthrough has not been coming. There are entities on both sides that benefit from this conflict. The longer the conflict is prolonged, the more the military gets funded to continue more operations. But these operations haven't helped. More and more young people are heading towards the insurgency. Some of you who follow the stories coming from Pakistan, there was this young lady who had 2 kids. She voluntarily went and joined the BLA to become a suicide bomber. She attacked the Chinese in Karachi. So there are these instances. Yeah. It's not like, again, I think it's difficult to convince my Pakistani friends, but it's not the monetary incentives. Like a lot of times we are told, well, they get funded, they get money from the Indians to do all this. These are all young people. A lot of times I have a bunch of Baloch friends sitting here. If you talk to them about individuals that they know about becoming suicide bombers, they will tell you, well, this person was on their LinkedIn profile.
A different type of mic check.
So they would say this person was in our classroom last week, or this person was in the library working on their resume, I can't believe this person could be an insurgent fighter. I can't believe this person could be a fighter. So the profiles of young people who are in the Balochistan insurgency these days is like extremely, alarming. I think the both sides have to do something
It's so
about it.
interesting hearing that, Malik Saab, because of course that profile gets repeated, right, in other places where there has been kind of extreme injustice, and then there are extreme responses to that injustice. I'm going to come out to you guys in a second. When we do come out to you, we'll take 3 or 4 interventions at the same time, and then our panelists should feel to respond to what they want. You're under no compulsion to respond to everything. Whatever resonates with you, but it's good to have a lot of voices into the space so we have a sense of where your thinking is at and what are some of the questions that are being asked. We're not going to resolve it here, but I think it gives us a sense of what the state of thinking is, at least amongst this group of amazing people around Pakistan. But Michael, I think some of Malik's comments kind of like right away resonate with your work, because you're working at this kind of intersection of sort of reporting and policy. And right now we have an American administration that, to say the least, is from a policy point of view, chaotic, would probably be the nicest way to put it. And so I think there's a lot of us who care about Pakistan and who care from the diaspora about American-Pakistan relations, which have been fraught and yeah, they've been fraught. I think fraud is probably the least we could say about it. So here's the question. From where you're at right now, Michael, what is the mood of the American administration towards Pakistan? Is there any clarity? And in what ways are those foreign policy moves, if any, influencing political action in Pakistan?
Yeah, great question. So I don't think there's been a Pakistan policy review in a U.S. government for quite a few years. And you have to go back to the first Trump administration, which was the last time that you had a South Asia policy review, which led to a...
Just speak a little bit louder, Michael, sorry.
Yeah, basically I said there has not been a Pakistan policy review within the U.S. government for quite some time. And you have to go back to the early part of the first Trump administration when you had the last South Asia policy review, and that resulted in a South Asia policy that President Trump unveiled at Fort Myer. But it was mainly focused on, it wasn't, in my view, it wasn't really a policy. It was focused on India, it was focused on Afghanistan, Pakistan, grouping the two countries together. So I think that we're at the next session, we're going to talk about U.S.-Pakistan relations in some detail. But in a nutshell, I would say that this administration, I don't think this will be a surprise to any of us, it's not going to prioritize Pakistan. And it certainly is not going to prioritize these types of issues that we're discussing in Pakistan. I think that we've seen in recent years that there have been several tools that have been used by administrations that focus on the issue of minority issues in Pakistan. And the State Department has come out with these annual reports on religious freedom, and the USCIRF, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, which is a bipartisan federal commission. It makes recommendations each year, and it has, on a number of occasions, recommended that Pakistan be a country of particular concern. And according to international religious freedom law, that means that the State Department, if it chooses to, could impose sanctions on Pakistan. It has not done that, but that is something that's there. So, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
And I think that if you look at domestic political realities in the U.S., and this is not just now, it's in recent years, because of the influence of Christian conservatives, I do think that the plight of Pakistani Christians is something that could be looked at for sure, not on a big level, but certainly could be there. And also, if you look at Capitol Hill, we're talking about the executive agency, if we look at Capitol Hill, there we have had members of Congress that have weighed in on issues mainly focused on religious minority issues in Pakistan. It's driven by constituent concerns. And so, for example, there's a representative from California, Brad Sherman, who's brought attention to Sindhi issues. And this is because of constituent issues. But the only other thing I would say is that we probably have to distinguish U.S. government approaches from U.S. approaches on the whole. And if you look at U.S. civil society, there's so many NGOs, you have religious media outlets that focus on religious freedom issues in Pakistan. And I should say, the Pakistani diaspora, I think we know, and it's reflected by two of our panelists, you have Pakistani minorities, significant number of them, included in the Pakistani diaspora here. And there's clearly been tremendous levels of work and advocacy and research and writing that focuses on these issues.
Yeah, and I think before we come out to you, that last question is also kind of where I'm feeling that we need to dig in a little bit more, because I think there's sort of two questions that emerge for us, right? One is that there's at times that the Pakistani diaspora can be incredibly influential. I think we saw some of it in the last presidential election, vis-a-vis the political situation in Pakistan. But I also think to myself, Rida, is how do young people in the diaspora, in some ways, when they do get activated and when they do become concerned, how is that concern met in Pakistan? And you were kind of right there, right? You're that person who's expressing what I would say is incredibly loving, compassionate concern for Pakistan, deeply embedded, as you said, in the aesthetics and a culture, your culture, which is so much part and parcel and woven into this thing that we call Pakistani culture. And you take your concerns, your observations, your creativity into Pakistan. What were the kind of conversations that you were having, right, with people in Pakistan, both those from within the Shia community and those from outside of that community? Was there like some things that emerged for you in that interaction and dialogue?
Yeah, I think that especially being a Shia Muslim from the diaspora or a Shia Muslim in Pakistan, it's really interesting because a lot of the conversation was about the common connection of Shia identity.
Right.
For example, a Shia Muslim from Karachi would have more in common with a Shia Muslim from Lucknow or Hyderabad in India than with their Pathan counterpart in Pakistan, because of the shared language, shared memory, culture. And so it's really interesting because us sitting in America, I was having these conversations even when in the summer there was a huge bombing in Farah Chinar. And this happens every year, and the Shia diaspora gets mobilized. This was happening a lot in the early 2010s, 2010 to 2013. That was like the bloodiest time for Shia Muslims all over Pakistan. There was like the Kohistan bus killing. There were Shias being pulled out of the Target killed. And so I think a common sentiment is we definitely do get activated, but every year there have been bombings in Peshawar and Farah Chinar, and I think as a diaspora we do these fundraisers. Me and a couple of Shia activists in America, we did this fundraiser and we raised money, but I feel like we're not connected as much with the people on the ground as we should be, especially because we have this shared identity. And I think that something that the diaspora can focus on is kind of looking beyond the mist and the clouds and actually connecting and focusing and centering the voices of people, Shia Muslims, Hazaras, like Ahmadis, Ismailis, like all of them in Pakistan, rather than, that shared identity. I think it's also important to understand what actually is happening on the ground. And I think there is this culture of defiance and resistance, especially in Shia tradition and Shia culture. When I was there doing research, a story that I kept hearing over and over again is my uncle was shot during this procession, or a group of people were targeted during this procession, but you still see people come out in numbers again and again. And I think that that's a really big advantage that Shia diaspora has, is we have that connection. But people have social media, but we also have a connection of shared identity, shared faith, and this culture of art and spirituality and martyrdom that I think connects us to our counterparts in Pakistan. So.
And the way that also begs a larger question, Malik Saab, and then we're going to come out to our friends here. And I'd be interested in your take on this as a journalist and someone who tries to see the big picture. Often we have found that religious authority in Pakistan can be used for good or for nefarious purposes, and sometimes good and nefarious at the same time, depending on where you sit politically or theologically. And I wonder what you see as the role of religious leadership in a way of addressing these questions of injustice and social fracture, or whether they can play a role at all, or if they too are deeply and institutionally compromised?
I think religion has always been used in Pakistan as a tool to control populations, to serve the interests of the establishment, of the ruling elite. And again, stepping back on the problems of Balochistan, for instance, Balochistan is extremely rich with mineral resources, gas, gold, copper. Since 1952, Balochistan has been meeting Pakistan's needs for natural gas. Whereas the province itself does not benefit from any of those resources. It's the land of superlatives, you know, the poorest, the least educated, the least developed province in the country. Now, when people ask the same thing, that how about our gas? And then the religious clergy comes in, they're like, we are Muslim brothers. There's no Baloch, there's no Shia, Sunni, or there's no Baloch, there's no Pashtun. So stop talking about ethnic identities. Pakistan has very systematically used religion as a tool to advance and to further the Pakistani identity. That we are all Muslims, we're all one Muslim brothers, so if we take the Muslim brothers' gas, what's the big deal? If we take the other Muslim brothers' gold, what's the big deal? So, on the other hand, the Baloch and the Pashtuns, they're like, no, let's renegotiate our relationship. We did not sign up to be in Pakistan because we are Muslims, because we were Muslims before 1947. So what's the justification? We could have joined Iran and Afghanistan, existing Muslim states. So in that sense, and Pakistan has very systematically funded madrasas to radicalize the Baloch society. The Baloch call themselves very secular. They never vote for religious political parties, unlike some other parts of Pakistan. So the state has tried its level best to push, to use Islam as a binding force. And the response from Balochistan, or from the Baloch people, or from the Pashtun people is like, we are Muslims, but at our own terms, not at your terms, because your terms of being a good Muslim means we, as the province of Balochistan, should not have a claim on our resources, on our gas, on our gold, on our copper, on our port, on anything. So Islam has somehow been very problematic for the Baloch people, because there's a very heavy tax or tariff, if you call it, we have to pay for being Muslims in Pakistan. Because every time we talk about our separate identity, we are told you are being anti-Islam. You are not respectful of the privileges of being a Muslim, that if we are Muslims, we are brothers together. So in a nutshell, madrasas have been promoted in Balochistan to counter the Baloch nationalist movement, which is very left-leaning, very liberal. So there's a lot of dislike for the Pakistani version of Islam, the state-sponsored Islam, because that comes at the cost of local people's aspirations. And at the same time, one thing that Michael briefly mentioned was the Lashkar-e-Jangvi, for example. Lashkar-e-Jangvi is a very lethal organization that is anti-Shia, anti-Hazara. It was initially founded in the Punjab, but it was somehow exported to Balochistan, and they recruited the local Baloch guys, local Baloch people, come join this, movement. So there have been systematic efforts, to radicalize the Baloch so that they go and join the Taliban, ISIS, LEJ, rather than being a part of the BLA. So the experience or the exploitation of Islam in Balochistan has been, people have learned, people have understood it. People have that shit detector, right? They can detect it immediately. Yeah, totally. By the time you just throw it, they're like, no, we know what this Muslim Brotherhood is all about. So you want to take our gas because we're Muslim brothers? No, that's not going to work. And that hasn't worked in Balochistan.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, especially this topic about the instrumentalization of Islamic narrative. It's like, I think, runs deep in so many of the themes that we've touched on. This is what we're going to do. We're going to take sort of 3 or 4 interventions. Can I ask everyone to be, the shorter and sharper you are, we have 35 minutes. So the shorter and sharper you are, the more we'll hear. For our panelists, like I said, don't feel compelled to respond to anything. Feel free to respond to what you want. Okay, so we're going to take one here. We're going to take one back there. We're going to take one here. Do I see one on this side of the room? We're going to take this one here. Okay, let's take those 4, and then we'll come back for a second round. Okay. Okay.
I'll try to keep it short.
Yeah, please.
Shark also PhD candidate, BA Political Science. Minor correction for the moderator.
No, please.
Clarity for my friends.
Of course.
Pakistani friends. So the term would be Baloch, Balochi would be the language, and
Got
the
it.
clothes are women there.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Malik Saab, I would say that not enough emphasis is given to the post-colonial Sandeman style Baloch hierarchy that we've inherited now. Part feudalist, part capitalist. Some argue that the Sardari system is dead or dying, but this new cadre of Meers, Vaderas, Takkaris, they have consolidated some of their socio-political and fiscal power. In that context, my question would be, why aren't land reforms in Pakistan discussed as much? And if you can talk about any other ways to dismantle that particular structure.
We're going to come back to that. Land reforms. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, hi everyone, my name is Sean. I'm a senior here. My question is definitely more pointed towards Rida. I'm just curious because I follow your content a lot, and I love it. It's very, very representative of, I think, Pakistani culture and broader South Asian culture. So my question actually is directed towards like journalism and the role that you think students have, and also the South Asian diaspora in general. Is what do you see are the key problems in representing Pakistani culture the way it should be? Because I think as someone who's actually half Pakistani, half Indian, and in the social media realm, I often find that I feel that personally, I think Indian diversity is definitely more shown, and in almost opposition to the Hindi nationalistic movement that you see in India. But in Pakistan, I feel like even in the US, people who are born here actually fall into the narrative of Punjabi supremacy, Sunni supremacy, and they foster it almost a little bit in certain spaces. And obviously, this is the first space I've seen where we're anti that, you know. And so, how do you see students helping with that movement?
That's a great question, Sean. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Go ahead, sir.
So we've been discussing very, very intellectually stimulating topics, and all of them are very critical topics. So one of the things we need to look into a little bit back, I think Pakistan in a good state in the early 60s too, is the root cause of most of this problem. And it is my opinion that probably this is the only country which has a concept of minority and majority. And my principal belief is, for any nation to be a democratic nation, everyone should have equal and same rights. So when you create a two segments of minority and majority, by definition, you basically follow an apartheid model. And a country cannot never unite when you have structurally designed it in such a way where the rights are created. Okay, that's one concern. The second thing, I was privileged to go to Balochistan in my early days and make some wonderful friends. One of the questions I have for the Balochistan, we have always taken stuff from them. What have we given them back? Nothing. Other than that. So we need to correct our constitution from the beginning, rewrite to meet at least the basic structure of the international law, without element of enforcing any religious component into it. The moment you keep the religion in the constitution, country will never survive.
Fascinating points. I'm looking forward to your feedback. We're going to take one more here, and then don't worry, we're coming to that side of the room. Go ahead, Pen.
I'm a Shia Muslim cardiologist from Pennsylvania. Born in the 80s, I've lived through the worst of the martial laws where all this extremism rose and all these groups were created as a mediator of a proxy war, which got Pakistan a lot of funding. So the problem herein is, unless and until you stop that funding, and unless and until you condemn all these blocks, all these groups across the board and say, this has to stop, you cannot stop ethnic violence, because they're rogue, they're out of control. So I have friends who belong to all different religions, and they have no problem with me. I live in Pakistan, I have Shia friends, Sunni friends, all kinds. But why exactly do they have a problem with me being a Shia is because they have just been taught this lesson, a ratified lesson, something they've mugged up. No knowledge of actual Islam, it's just political Islam. So you have to stop that madrasa. You have to stop madrasas and proxy wars in order to control these groups.
A lot of really amazing questions. So we got the issue of land reforms, where we're looking at a comparison of the way in which culture is represented and diversity is represented within the broader diaspora and coming from content creators. Constitutional reform meets some sort of economic justice is what the gentleman talked about, and our good friend, the doctor cardiologist, really addressed this idea of the structural problems of the way monies flow and support this, how Pakistan is made to fight proxy wars, and the pernicious effects of the madrasa system on creating certain ideas which then get perpetuated. We'll start in the opposite direction. Malik, we'll start with you and we'll go down that. Feel free to pick up anything that you want.
Okay, sure. I think since most Pakistanis don't talk about Balochistan as much as we talk about Pakistan's relationship with the US, I would give an example of US-Pakistan relationship where all of us have somehow expressed frustration at times why the US always works with Pakistani dictators. Why don't they support democracy? They love democracy, they talk about democracy and of human rights. Why did they engage with General Zia? Why did they engage with General Musharraf? And we haven't been able to find an answer to that question. The same applies to Balochistan. The Pakistani military or even the ruling political parties, whether it's the Pakistan People's Party or the Muslim League or the Muslim League Q or the PTI, they've always worked with the Sardars, with the Nawabs, so that they wouldn't have to work with the masses. Therefore, the current Chief Minister, Sarfaraz Bugti, joined the People's Party. Within 2 months, the People's Party made him the Chief Ministerial candidate. It doesn't work that way. You have to have like 2 or 3 decades of experience working for a political party to become their Chief Ministerial candidate, because Sarfaraz is a staunch pro-military guy. He was their interior minister. He was the interior minister when Kakar was the interim prime minister. So that has been the modus operandi throughout the years. In Pakistan, what happens? They pick up a bunch of Baloch tribal chiefs, bribe them, and depends on who the military chooses to run the government this time. If it is the Q League, so all these tribal chiefs become the Muslim League, and elections happen, and Muslim League forms the government. Then fast forward, then there is the People's Party or the People's Party coming in power, or the Nawaz League coming in power. All these tribal chiefs are told to go and join the other party. They're like, in the greater interest of the nation and of democracy of the Baloch people, we have decided to join this party. Then the same faces, you pick up like the parliament list or the cabinet list from the 70s. It's the same last names from 70s and 80s and 90s. It's the same people. So it's the old wine in the new bottle, So every time there is a new government, depending on who is running the government in Islamabad, these guys switch parties. So one person, if you look at anybody's profile, they've switched 5 or 6 parties. The Chief Minister Sarfaraz Bugti was in the Balochistan Awami Party, right, a few years back. The party dismantled. So that is what has happened, and that's one of the reasons for frustration in Balochistan as well. Why can't we have our own representative government in Balochistan? Why can't a Baloch why is there a precondition? Why is there this prerequisite that you've got to be pro-military to become the Chief Minister of the province? Why do I have to assert my loyalty to Pakistan again and again and again? Why doesn't a Punjabi have to do all that? So to be the Balochistan Chief Minister, you somehow have to get a clearance from the military. You have to be in their good books. You don't have to be the so-called enemy. You don't have to be the enemy of the state. These pre-qualifications are not applied elsewhere in the country. But when you're a Baloch, you have to repeatedly affirm that you love Pakistan, you love the Pakistani military, you don't support Free Balochistan, you don't support the BLA. And it's a long list of things that we as Baloch have to check time and again. So there's a lot of frustration that the Chief Minister, if you talk to the Baloch people, they're like, he is the GHQ's guy, he's not our guy. He serves their interests, he doesn't serve our interests. Why can't we have free elections? Why can't the Baloch people pick up whoever they like, right? So that's been a big, dispute between the masses and the GHQ and all their people. And the Pakistanis continuously insult the Baloch by imposing these people like Anwarullah Kakar, who can bring 100 people together and who's never been an MP or an MNA, becomes the caretaker prime minister of the country, and then the whole country is told, look, we have a prime minister from Balochistan. What else do you want, right? But people are not so stupid, right? People question all these things.
Rida, a great question from Sean
on
culture and representation.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on his question as well.
Please, yeah, absolutely.
So I love this question because I struggle with this so much. I think that as Pakistani students in diaspora, we fall into this trap of nationalism and just believing everything our parents said because they obviously came from Pakistan, lived in Pakistan. I think if you ask many Pakistani people, they don't even know what Lashkar-e-Jangvi or Sipahi Sahaba or any of these things are, which is really sad. They only know the extent of, Pakistani media and culture, which is important, but there are problems happening in the country that they just don't acknowledge. And I think that the idea of like, oh yeah, Pakistan is like this great country, which it is, but I think that it's really important. There's like this line that my friend always says, and it's, you can be critical but not dismissive, and you can be respectful but not submissive to something. And I think my biggest advice to any Pakistani student who's trying to engage with this idea of Pakistan is, first of all, understand your history. Like, most of the people who are, you know, like using these phrases of India and Pakistan, their families have traveled across the border. Like, I'm Pakistani, but my family is originally from India. Like, there's Mahajirs who are in Karachi. Most of the people who live in Karachi, they came from across the border. Urdu is the language of Pakistan. I was born in Lucknow. I think that that's the biggest thing, is we fall into these like binaries and like this idea of like black or white. And I think that's what holds us back of actually reaching like true discourse. Another thing that I wrote down while you were talking was, I think something we fail to do is push back, and we fail to educate ourselves. All we want to do as students is engage. Like, we want to just like have a fundraiser. We want to engage with like the speakers who are coming. First, vet the speakers. You know, have questions ready to push back on the speakers. Like, I wanted people to push back and be like, oh, well, what do you know about, you know, sitting on this panel? Like, I want to know more about your experience. So first educate and then engage. Like, even on this panel, like, ask us for resources. Like, even during my master's, I was like asking my professors, like, what can I do to learn more about Balochistan, about like, you know, all these movements, and then engage and like do fundraisers. And then lastly, I think when it comes to covering and talking about Pakistan, the reality of the situation is we will be more and more removed as the years go on. Our next generation is going to be even less than what we were. Like, you know, unless they're coming straight from Pakistan, they're doing like, you know, doing their education here. Our identity to our country is really what we choose it to be. So it shouldn't just be clothing and media. We should be trying to, we have social media, we have avenues to understand. There's documentaries, like there's a documentary called The Killing Fields, and it's about Hazara killings in Pakistan. It's like a great resource. So I think really intentionally trying to understand, what does it mean when you say you're Pakistani? Does it mean that you know, can speak Urdu and listen to like Cook Studio and watch dramas? Like, I don't think that that's what all of us want to do as like people who want to engage with, you know, intellectual discourse about minorities and culture and language, and inclusivity and exclusivity. So I think that's like the biggest thing, is be critical but not dismissive, and respectful but not submissive of everything you're learning about your country. And then something I also wanted to touch on is, what was your name? Okay, Atika. Yeah, I think a big struggle also with Shias is, like I said at the beginning, like, we are a part of the fabric of this country. We're not, like, every day as a Shia you can walk around and still feel like you're Pakistani, but it's this influx, and it started really after, I mean, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was part of a prominent landowning Shia family. After that, Zia al-Haq took over, and that's when really this money from Saudi Arabia started flowing into the country. And if you look at, like, we did a research project on this. It was like 30 madrasas that year, and the following year was 256 madrasas. And that shows there's like this slow shift of this ideology against anything that's mainstream Wahhabi Sunni Islam. So the everyday people in like Lahore, Islamabad, Karachi, they don't feel it, but slowly our country is changing, like over the 30 or 40 years that we're going through this Islamization.
Michael, so many interesting questions about constitution, about land reform. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I could just respond to the discussion, a few points that came to mind. First of all, to Malik's comment about the Americans always working with the generals and the dictators, and what's the answer to that question of why that happens? For me, it's pretty simple. Traditionally, American interests in Pakistan have been perceived through security lenses, and it's the generals and the dictators that have driven those policies. And the conclusion in Washington for many years has been that when you need to get things done, you go to the generals. It's not a good thing for democracy, but this is basically the way this has been. That's why that's the case. Also, a lot of discussion about madrasas. This is a critical issue to discuss, but I think it's important that we need to make sure that we look at this with some nuance. I think that it's very important to acknowledge that bigots and intolerance don't always go to madrasas, right? I mean, there have been a number of terrorists. One that comes to mind in particular, Saad Aziz, the guy who, as I understand it, was responsible for the killing of, blanking on her name. So the human rights activist that had that cafe in Karachi. He had gone to IBA, I believe. He never went to a madrasa. He'd never been exposed to any of that. At the same time, there are plenty of people that go to madrasas that are not intolerance or bigots. I think that it's important just to make sure that we capture that nuance. Also, a great comment by my friend here about root causes of all the stuff that we're talking about. I think that it's so important to talk about the manifestations of what's happening and why it's so concerning, but also looking at why it's happening. Why has this been happening for so long, and why does it continue to happen? And here, I mean, this could be a whole other session. We won't go into it, but I think that you have to go back to Pakistan's independence, right? Pakistan was founded as a homeland for Muslims, and yet after that happened, there was never a clear sense as to what Islam, well, religion generally speaking, but Islam as well, what that would mean for Pakistan. And that I would argue that's created these vacuums that have enabled people that have very bigoted and intolerant views of religion to step in and impose their views. And we saw that with Zia, we've seen it with militants and so many others as well. I'd also highlight issues like the fact that the judiciary is missing in action so many times, right? These attacks on religious minorities, they're not sufficiently investigated, much less prosecuted. Law enforcement, we know that so many times when you have these mob lynchings of people accused of blasphemy, the police are either not there or they're just standing by. This is very concerning. The fact that you've had state sponsorship of groups like Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, this is very important to acknowledge. And also the regional picture, again. We know that Pakistan borders Iran. Iran is the world's largest Shia state. Pakistan has long had a close partnership with Saudi Arabia, which is, of course, Iran's Sunni rival. And that Saudi Arabia-Iran rivalry has often played out in Pakistan along sectarian lines, to the extent that you've had Iran try to cultivate these Shia militias in Pakistan, and Afghanistan for that matter, whereas Saudi Arabia has exported Wahhabism, which of course takes a hostile position toward Shia Islam. So I think that, again, bringing that external factor back into the picture is important.
A quick comment, Malik, and then I'm going to take another large round, and then we'll close up, because I'm keeping an eye on time, and my good friends from YPAC are keeping us on time.
Yeah, I just want to mention, you mentioned the constitution part. I think there's a lot of arrogance and smugness on the part of the Pakistani majority when it comes to Balochistan. They're like, you're only 6% of the population. Why do you claim ownership on your resources and stuff like that? But I think Balochistan needs constitutional protections. Why do we have laws? Laws are meant to protect the weakest of the community, of a society. When you have nowhere else to go, when you're not powerful enough, you would look up to the law. In Pakistan, I think if we're the 6% of the population, if you look at the statistics from last year, 95% of the terrorist attacks, violent attacks, took place in Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. That's not 95% of the whole terrorism that happens in the country. So there is a need for a big intervention. That intervention cannot come from our end. That intervention has to come from the majority, from the Punjab, from the Punjabi intellectuals and the scholars and bureaucrats and the diaspora, pushing the Pakistanis to make sure that you don't subject your own population to enforced disappearances. You don't kill their young people and dump their dead bodies in the streets. So there is a need for, of course the Pakistani constitution does not say go and kill people, right? Go and disappear people. I'm sure no constitution in the world says that, but the minorities in Pakistan need an extra layer of protection. Like with the Ahmadis, for instance, they are declared as non-Muslims in the country's constitution. Now, where should they go? So you, as a citizen, expect the state to come to protect you, to shield you when some vigilantes are up there to grab you and mob you in public. So you need that kind of protection. That's got to come from the state, So that's why I keep telling my Pakistani friends that the intervention has got to come from you. The advocacy has got to come from you, reminding the Pakistani rulers, the establishment, the military, that these guys need protection. Where else should we go? Where should our young people go? Every day, I can tell you the dozens of stories of personal friends, classmates, co-workers who disappeared and who were killed in the government custody. So there's a need for an immediate intervention on this.
Okay, I got a number of hands up. I'm going to start over here. I'm coming to you next, and then I'm going to you, and I see other hands. And if you have a question, just do put up your hand. We'll take a lot this round, and then we'll have a kind of a concluding sort of. So go ahead.
So my question is for Rida. I'm from Peshawar. So I kind of grew up in Peshawar, so I kind of know the whole Pakistan culture and stuff. But the question that I had for you is, it seems that there's a big shift population in the U.S., which is really well kind of immersed in the society. How come there hasn't been any kind of discussion in the Congress about the Shia persecution in Pakistan? There's a Human Rights Commission. Doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, but this thing has been going on for 30, 40 years. And I don't remember ever seeing some kind of a push towards the Congress and kind of bringing in all the congressmen because they would agree to this conversation. So could you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, and I think that raises the larger question, right, of diaspora activism and pressure, and yeah, I think that's an interesting entree to a whole set of questions. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, so
nice and loud.
So my name is Imtiaz Ali. I'm a student of politics and international relations. Pakistan has 4 major challenges today. One is Baloch insurgency. Second is TTP. Third is PTI's political dissent against military. And fourth one is TTP.
TLP and then TTP.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
So Pakistan has 4 challenges: Baloch insurgency and TTP. Third one is PTI's political dissent against military, and fourth one is TLP, Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan. Directly or indirectly, these 4 challenges either created, supported, or fueled by one institution. So we have to think about it actually. How can, once you create the problem, how can you control it? How can, what is the way forward?
I think that is like a brilliant question.
The answer as well.
Because the interesting thing is I think what we're talking about, right, are movements, right? And movements are problematic. But what happens when the train leaves the station and someone cuts the brakes, right? Or the horse bolts from the stable and it's got no rider. This is like all of these euphemisms and cliches are actually true, right? How do you deal with a problem once it has been developed and that's loose in society? I think that's a very critical question. We're going to take a question here. Go ahead.
My question is related to basically the concern in Balochistan is about resources, right?
Not really. I think like Baloch people hardly talk about resources. For us, our young people should not disappear. Like in Baloch society, we hardly talk about resources. They don't matter. For us, it's our young people who disappear, whose dead bodies are thrown away. Resources are like maybe if you have a list of top 10.
So, okay, but talking about resources, because I heard a comment about resources, our resources, we should get our gas. So how would you propose that to be solved? Should it be private ownership, like the gas under a certain person's land? That person should get it, or should it be like a provincial thing? The second was about security. So you said we need security. Does that mean bringing in the army to have camps? Because I don't think that's acceptable, because I'm from have some SWAT relationships. They don't want the army. And what about a grassroots movement? It's tied to the question of, do you think it's beyond, like the Baloch people, they don't want to be Pakistan at all, or is there still like some hope that it can draw back?
Yeah, really great question. I'm just going to take a quick sweep. I'm seeing a few hands here. I'm seeing a few hands there. I want to hear any female voices. Want to jump into the equation? I'm going to come to you next for sure. Anyone else? Okay, I got a few. Let's try to take 3 or 4 more. I know it's a lot, but like I said, respond to what you can. I'm going to take intervention here, and then I'm going to go 1, 2, 3.
Questions.
Okay, go ahead. It's all right. Perspective. You answer what you can. Go ahead.
Sorry. My name's Sia. I'm a senior in high school nearby, and my question is like, I know the name Pakistan is like literally derived from like the 5 provinces, from what I've heard from my parents and stuff. But like my question is, why can they like recognize themselves as like Pakistani, right? But then continue to like disrespect like the Balochi culture and like the culture of like KPK.
Right. So I think also coming back to this question of origin, right? Where does the origin of this stuff come from? Go ahead.
Yeah. So my question is more of a follow-up question to something that was asked earlier. If you look at the sort of establishment from Islamabad or previously from Karachi and the military as some sort of foreign power, and there's the youth of Balochistan rebelling against that. But there is that feudal system. There are local actors that the military mobilizes. It's not like the army is physically deployed in Quetta. So whenever rightfully so, whenever the resulting dissent comes from the youth of Balochistan, how come it's always directed at the more further away? And to add to that, you mentioned Musharraf as martial law has been supported by the West. The dissent against that mostly went against Musharraf internally. So my question is more like, why does that violence, that dissent never really materialize against the feudal lords before it goes to a one step above that?
A lot of great questions. Are there organizers in the room? Are any of our organizers? I just wanted to get a time check. Do we start a bit late? Do we have a little flexibility?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Is that what we got?
Yes.
Okay, then I'm going to take some more questions, if that's okay, and then I'll give each of you a concluding remark. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take this question here. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is for Rida or anybody, but
Nice and loud.
so the religious minorities in Pakistan, like Shias, Ahmadis, considering Ahmadis, for them to be such a small minority, like even smaller than Shias or even any other religious minorities, how should they begin to like advocate for themselves when there's such a small community? Should they try to be in the bigger collective of all religious minorities, or should they try to advocate for themselves because there's not really much for them to go or do?
Yeah, it's this whole question of advocacy. What does advocacy even look like when you're in such a difficult minoritized situation? We're going to take that question. You've been very patient, and then I'm coming to you.
I'm going to be super quick.
Yeah.
Malik, I'm from Balochistan as well.
Please.
Malik talked about Balochistan in depth, and I don't need to talk about it. Just an observation, I had a friend from Balochistan, and he was a Shia, and I was in Islamabad in 2013. He mentioned something that I think speaks to the reality of the situation. He said, I'm lucky because I look like Chinese, and a lot of people cannot identify me as a Shia.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for that very poignant observation. Go ahead, brother.
Hi, Hamza Ansari, Canadian Pakistani, working foreign policy and international development. First, I want to say, Malik, I commend you for coming out and speaking and engaging, because I think that a lot of people, sometimes we come from our parents' generation has that knowledge or those traumas passed on, but we don't actually understand them, and especially the younger generation actually doesn't even, they don't even have those narratives in their minds. So I think a lot of people are willing to engage and learn. So please keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to ask you, both of you actually, if you were negotiating, you had opportunity to negotiate on behalf of your issue, what are 2 points that you would focus on for a path forward?
Well, a really huge breadth of questions, but I think picking up on a lot of the themes that we've already been talking about, Pakistan's origin story, this question of resources versus national identity, this idea of being minoritized, but also hiding the fact that you are that minority, this kind of sublimation that you so kind of eloquently spoke about, and then this whole notion of advocacy, right? What does advocacy even mean in a potentially violent kind of situation, reality? And then what do we do with all these movements that all of you have mentioned, obliquely or by name? And when the horse is bolted, how do you deal with things that are so far ahead and so far developed? So much to choose. I just want to say thank you to everyone who contributed. These are really meaningful, important, and I think serious questions, and I think it speaks to all of you and the intentionality with which the conference has been organized and the way you're approaching it is really with a great deal of consideration. Because I think often that consideration is missing in this conversation to begin with. So thank you very much, everyone. I'll begin with you, Michael, and we'll give the last word to Malik. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a really great discussion. I'd like to try to end on a forward-looking note. And so that gets to the issue of how do we start developing incentive structures for meaningful change to address these very serious, complex challenges that we're discussing. And what I think of right away is Pakistan. What stands out about Pakistan? The fact that its median age is 22 and has been for quite a few years, and according to UN estimates will be in the 30s for the next few decades. So if you want to talk about the future and how things could get better, you have to focus on youth and what role they can play in moving forward. And I think that it's a myth that young people are more are more progressive or tolerant than their parents' generation. I think we found that that's oftentimes not the case, not just in Pakistan, but in many contexts. There was a poll. Survey data is tough in Pakistan in so many cases, especially when it comes to sensitive issues like this. But some years ago, there was a poll that came out that surveyed young people, and it found that about 40% of those polled said that Shias are not Muslims. 40%. But here's the thing, just a year or two ago, there was another poll that came out of young people, and it found something like 81% of them said that religious freedom issues are important, religious minorities need to be protected, and so on and so on. So it's just one data point. It's just that. But I think that's critical. So when you talk about the need to develop new narratives of tolerance and diversity and support of interfaith dialogue and things like that, you need to identify influencers that resonate with young people, whether that's religious leaders or it's others, entertainers, athletes, celebrities, anything like that. The focus needs to be on youth, and young people need to be driving these new narratives as well. But we all know in Pakistan, youth empowerment itself is a tricky issue. With student unions having been banned for so many years, it's tough to get to that. But I think for me, I don't have a really good specific answer for this, but I think that whatever the solution is, it has to involve the younger generation.
Yeah. I think that demographic data point is absolutely vital. And I think Pakistan sort of sits apart as a group of nations in the world where that youth, the demographic youth bomb hasn't exploded yet. It's like it keeps getting bigger and bigger, and it's sustained right within population. Right. So really unusual and interesting demographic reality. And thank you, Michael, for kind of bringing us back to that, because I think that should be really important as we're thinking about the future of Pakistan, because the future of Pakistan is manifestly young. Yeah. Rida, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on, sorry, what was your name? Ali, yeah. So I'm going to touch on what he said, kind of wrap it up that way. I think a really big point that I can speak to is advocacy and activism in the diaspora and how we can't be hypocritical. What you said about Peshawar, I have been asking myself that same question, like why can we not mobilize as a Muslim community or as a Pakistani community to advocate on behalf of this minority group in our country? I'm going to paint a picture for you to show you how frustrating this is. In 2019, there was a shooting in New Zealand. And this was when I think people were at Jummah prayer, and I think 47 people were killed or 51 people, We did a vigil for that. I was doing advocacy on campus. We did a vigil for those Muslim people who were killed during Jummah. 200 people showed up. Muslim students told everybody on campus to come. 2 years later, or 3 years later in 2022, the spring of my senior year, I was MSA president, there was a bombing in Peshawar at a Jummah prayer, and 47 people were killed. And I organized a vigil. There were 5 people in the room with me. And the whole Muslim Students Association, the whole Pakistani Students Association knew about it. This is a microcosm of what's happening in the country. If we can't advocate, if Pakistanis can advocate for every issue, and it's not about whataboutism, because if you're so proudly Pakistani and you can speak about Palestine, which you absolutely should, then you can speak about what's happening in your country to Ahmadis and Shias and Christians. I think that's the biggest takeaway, is like if you're sitting here and you are calling yourself Pakistani, then you should know all parts of what being Pakistani means, And I think the biggest barrier for us is like, we haven't been able to lobby to Congress or lobby to bigger groups because we can't get our own groups to, merge with us and to care about the issues about what's happening in their country. So I think that's like the biggest takeaway. And then also the second prong of that is like education. Like I know everybody doesn't know what's going on in every single group. Like that can be said about so many things. But if you're leaving here today, like I'm sure there's books and resources that we can offer you to learn more. And I really think that that's the path forward. Like we get to choose whether this will continue or whether it will, come to a close or at least lessen with our generation.
Thank you very much for that. Malik, take us home.
So as a graduate of a School of Government, I'm a stark believer in the institution of government. I'm not an anarchist. I don't want people to blow up the institution of the government because the government can accomplish so much. Governments are powerful. They're very, very powerful if they're in the right people's hands. So to answer a lot of questions, I think there was a question from here. My answer is yes, we need to have a good government that delivers, that is representative of the people, is not imposed on the people of Balochistan, and that government makes the decisions. There should never be decisions beyond the government. Non-state actors should never be making decisions. Non-state actors shouldn't be the ones who should decide who is a good Muslim, who is a good Baloch, who is a good Pakistani. It's for the state, for the government. I'm a staunch believer in the institution of the government. So I think, yes, there have got to be free elections, right? In the first place, free elections, so that the provincial assembly is representative of the province, and it should legislate the distribution of the resources between the center and the province. As I said, there's got to be constitutional arrangements because we are 5% of the population. We can't compete with Punjab unless we have constitutional protections the way we have in the upper house of the parliament, in the Senate. Everybody's equal in the Senate. Now, that is what leads to your question because, okay, when we formed a federation in Pakistan, we were different entities. We were offered a promise. And the people of Balochistan feel that promise has been shattered. We were betrayed. We were told there's going to be a country where everybody will be treated equally. We haven't been treated equally. Our young people have been victimized. You haven't shared the resources respectfully. So that trust has somehow shattered. One of the two things that I would highly recommend, one, you have heard me say so many times, I think the disappearances have to stop. Disappearances, the killing of the young people, this is going to have very long-term consequences. I know people who were who were not born when their dad went missing, their cousin went missing. They are today at the forefront of the Balochistan movement. Don't forget that these people are going to forget. They will never forget. They will come back and they will come back to haunt us still. So there's got the issue of enforced disappearances, the intervention from the military, because the military is responsible for that. The judiciary has to intervene because nobody else can urge the security forces, the secret services to bring the missing persons back. This is all extrajudicial. This shouldn't happen. This is anti-Pakistan in itself to subject Pakistani citizens to disappearances. That's got to stop. Secondly, what needs to happen, something that's these days not very popular in this country, but has got to go back to Pakistan, is DEI. We have to have diversity in Pakistan. We have to have inclusion. We have to include people. The Baloch people, or the people of Balochistan, can't catch up with the Punjabis, with the Sindhis and other advanced privileged communities. You have got to have affirmative action. You have to induct people. The people from Balochistan, people who haven't had the privilege of going to elite schools. Their education is relatively weaker and poorer. They haven't had as much exposure as people from Lahore and Islamabad and Karachi have had. So there's got to be DEI. It's a bad thing here in this country. It's very important in Pakistan. Bring the Baloch people, bring the minorities in the military, in the bureaucracy, take their kids to good universities, give them scholarships, give them a sense of ownership. That only the government can do. Otherwise, it's not possible to integrate the people of Balochistan in the Pakistani Federation. So again, it's something that's doable. It's not impossible.
What an incredibly rich conversation, and thank you for an incredibly rich set of interventions from the room. I think one thing, just an editorial comment I'm at before we recognize each of your contributions is part of me does think about, especially when we talk about this question of religion, religious narrative, and being a professor of theology, and I teach Islam to Christian seminarians up at the Yale Divinity School. So always thinking about the way in which religion is taught and explored. I often think to myself where is the kind of the discursive religious missing link in Pakistan, right? Where does faith, which is based on ethics and values and morals and kind of a connection to a divine, that in our essential Islamic cultures is deeply moving and motivating, right? Not in a kind of a rules and regulations way, but if I may invoke Bulleh Shah in a kind of a Bulleh Shah-esque way, right? And I do wonder to myself where and how are those voices within religious and theological spaces being supported, where faith itself and ways in which faith are presented become part of the important mood music in doing the work that all three of you have talked about and many of you have alluded to. And I think part of that is challenging religious institutions. And I know there have been moments of that, and part of that, the response has been violent to that, but I do feel that in a place like Pakistan, where there is so much cultural and intellectual and religious diversity, there must be some space given to the development of this beyond a particular ossified mullah class. And I do feel that there is a possibility for that, and I know in our critique and my own critique of the religious establishment from afar, I think we feel a bit nervous about it, but I don't think we should be. I think part of challenging that kind of establishment that you talked about, Dr. Atika, is empowering us with a kind of approach to faith that is deeply progressive and deeply just. And I think about some really interesting academic work being done right now around, for example, Sufi movements in the 1930s and religious Marxism. That would be considered very haram today. But in fact, I think in our own South Asian Muslim culture, we have a variety of different Islamic movements, tendencies, perspectives, and theologies that we can revive and go back to. And I do feel like often we sidestep that issue, not because we don't think it's important, but because it's a quagmire. But I do feel there's possibility for it. So it's my editorial comment to add in that I hope we'll be able to explore some of the broader, religious and theological movements outside of the conventional madrasa systems. And for us to also recognize, my last point is to think about that we have an example of a cataclysmic breakup of Pakistan, right? The liberation and the creation of Bangladesh, the way in which the Pakistani state treated democracy before the Bangladesh liberation movement succeeded, I think is all a cautionary tale. And the fact that the Pakistani body politic is following the same crappy playbook that they followed since 1947 in the case of Bengalis who were part of the Pakistani nation and who were compelled to seek liberation should be a cautionary tale for anyone who cares about Pakistan in the room. And they, their DEI became too late, right? My Nana was a recipient of a DEI scholarship to go to Dhaka and to learn Bengali in the 1950s, late 50s. So it was a bit too late. It was a bit too late to do that. I want us to give a big thank you to